I am so pleased to be part of the sisterhood here at the Women of Power Summit. And you know, I said this before, and I'm gonna say it again. Y'all look so good. When Black women show up, we show out. And it's literally been just an inspiration, a sea of Black girl magic. I sort of think that God sort of like sprinkled a little extra sauce on us. Like, I don't know, I just want to say that you guys look so good, and that I am so honored to be here amongst you and have you here at the Women of Power Summit. So give it up for yourselves. Okay, so I have a few housekeeping items to share before we begin our next conversation. Please be sure to visit the Sponsors Expo, where you can learn, enjoy, and do any of a number of things. Have you guys already been to the expo already? By show of hands? Okay, well, there is a lot to see and do. You'll find the Show Us Your Broadway at the Prudential booth, where you can create your own Broadway memory. You can take pictures with the newest Toyota Camry. Discover opportunities at the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. Woo! Yes, okay. Visit the Madam Beauty Bar at the Walmart booth. Walmart, okay, Walmart's in the house. Stop by the Goldman Sachs booth for a professional headshot. And it's not too late to enter the Win Apple AirPods contest, and you can enter at the ADP booth, and the winners will be announced at tomorrow's luncheon. So join us tomorrow morning as we start the day with another compelling conversation that counts. The New Guard, the women running Black-owned media, hosted by Goldman Sachs. Our executive managing editor, Elisa Gomes, will sit down for a candid conversation with Michelle Gee and Caroline Wunga, the women responsible for carrying on and building upon the legacies of Ebony Jet and Essence magazines, respectively. And of course, follow Black Enterprise on social media to access exclusive content and use the hashtag BEWPS when sharing your experiences. How many are tweeting, posting, Instagram? Show of hands. Are you using the hashtag? Okay, good. Again, hashtag BEWPS. Continue to share our experience with the rest of your network. So now let's get to our conversations that count. The seat of power, getting on corporate boards. We're going to take a look at just what it takes to prepare yourself for that seat of power. Black executives made record gains in 2021 in securing seats on corporate boards, but there is still so much work to be done. Our panelists have been through the trials and are here to share with you how they made it to the boardroom and how they're changing the corporate landscape from the top. Let's meet these remarkable women, starting with Edith Cooper. She serves on the board of directors of not one, not two, but 3 major corporations. We're talking PepsiCo, Amazon, and EQT. She is also the co-founder of Medley, a company that helps growth-minded individuals create their career path. Now, Edith is joined by Gail V. King, Corporate Director and former Executive Vice President, Chief Administrative Officer for Nationwide. Please join me in welcoming Edith and Gail.
All right. How are you guys? All right. Let's hear more energy than that. We just heard Dionne Warwick, and last night we were honoring some amazing women, and today Janice and Cheryl Lynn, they just brought the house down. So give yourselves a big round of applause. Let's give Black Enterprise a big round of applause. You know, I don't know about you, but last night I walked away and I was inspired to figure out what else I can do to make a difference. But what I'm excited about is that I have an opportunity to interview one of my personal sheroes, and I know all of us have sheroes. You all know Edith Cooper here. Yes, give her a big round of applause. You know, one of the things I think we all do from time to time is that, you know, I didn't know her personally, but I knew of her. And I know what it takes to be successful in corporate America. And what she's done is simply, simply amazing. And so you've read her bio, so you know that her academic excellence is amazing. You know that her leadership at the C-suite and at the board is very strong. But what I want you to know is she's a sister girl. She and I had an opportunity to chat the other day, and we left. I mean, we're going to be best friends from now on.
Oh, for sure. No doubt about it.
It was absolutely amazing. But what we want to do today is to tell you that if you want to be on a board, that if you do the work that you can be on a board. And Edith is going to share with you a little bit about, you know, what she recommends and what her journey has been. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is let's just jump into it. I want to talk with Edith first so we can get to know her personally. And so Edith, tell us a little bit about your North Star. And how your personal North Star has helped you achieve all of your many accomplishments.
Sure, absolutely. First, I really want to thank Black Enterprise for bringing us all together. It's been a long time coming, I think, for all of us to really experience the energy that I'm feeling, that I know and that I see in all of you. So thanks for that. And Gail, you were right. You know, it seems like we've known each other forever, holding hands back there, hugging, etc. We've talked to each other for 15 minutes. But that is what it's like when you meet somebody who is down with who you are and what you aspire to be. So I think I have to stop avoiding that question that you just asked me, which is to share, you know, my personal story. It's not something that I think about often, but I do think it starts at a place of who I am in my family and what I evolved into. And I say evolved because I didn't set my sights for, you know, working in finance or, you know, going through an organization like Goldman Sachs, or quite frankly, doing all of that and having a family and friends, those that hung out and waited for me to return their phone calls and texts. I am one of 5 kids. I'm the middle. Is there anybody here who's a middle kid? Yeah, okay, so you probably are going to get what I'm going to say. 2 older sisters, 2 younger brothers, and me. And my grandmother said to me long ago, don't worry, your oldest sister is a genius, and you know, your other sister's beautiful, and you have a good personality, you'll be fine. And exactly. So, you know, I guess I kind of went with what I had, which was a real interest in not just having a personality, but really getting to know people and really learning and understanding. You know, I loved spending time with my grandparents and my grandparents' friends because, 1, they had time to spend with me, and 2, because they were like different, and I felt like there was a lot of things I could take away. So don't worry, I'll skip from being a child to more recent history. And professionally, again, I went into the workplace, what was it now, 35, 40 years ago, you know, wanting to really like survive and figure it out. And, you know, gosh, I think often, what would it have been like if I had this? You know, what if I had had a medley of 1,500 people who gathered and gave me joy and energy? Instead, what we needed to do then, and I think I could include you in this, is we needed to find those people who we could connect to, who believed in us and our potential, and lever that to get to the next thing. And that was really key to me. That was really key, those relationships that I was able to develop. People like, you know, Vernon Jordan, people like, you know, Mr. Graves, the first Mr. Graves, not the current Butch Graves, but all my friends who all kind of saw something that I actually didn't see in myself, which enabled me to put myself out there, to take more risks, to fail, right? Like failing is really an important part of my learning, because if you don't fail, and everything is smooth sailing, I would argue you're not getting into that uncomfortable zone. And the only way you can do that is when you have a network of people who can like kind of literally pick you up and go, that was really bad. You really imploded. But let's figure out how to get through that. And that's opened a lot of doors, and I've been very grateful for that.
Sounds great. So thank you. So let's talk about your first board. Because again, many of these women are either ready to be on a board now, board ready, or are thinking about being on a board in the future. So tell us a little bit about when you knew you were ready to be on a board, and then, you know, what was your path to that?
I think the core of it is that relationships really matter. And my first board position was in a private company. I joined the board of Slack. And that was really important because I was starting to consider leaving Goldman Sachs. You know, while I was at Goldman, I was not allowed to serve on boards. But as I was thinking of whether to stay or go or what my next moves were, you know, I really did think about, you know, the board construct. But I thought about it not because I wanted it to add to my list of things that I'd done. I thought about it as a way to expand my horizon and my perspectives and my experiences. And while working at Goldman Sachs, I ran the human capital management area with many people who are here today in HR, but also around the firm. And I went to spend some time at Slack. And I had a meeting with the CEO, Stuart Butterfield, and he said, hey, good ideas, do you want to be my HR person? I'm like, absolutely not. But what's on your mind? And that led to a series of conversations. I don't know how many hours he'd call me from this area. He's like, oh, I was thinking about this, and what do you think about that? And he said to me, listen, if you ever want to serve on a board, I'd be really interested. And that's a really important launch pad, right? Because in order to get on boards, this is like the storyboard of why not. Well, you know, you need experience. Well, how do you get experience? You have to get on a board. And so it was a wonderful first opportunity for me, Gail, because it was a business that I had gotten to know. I believed in the CEO and the culture, right? So all you're hearing is I'm starting to develop an ethos of what I was looking for in a company and where I wanted to get involved. And that led to other opportunities that came from relationships that I've built over the years.
Wow. Sounds really great. So one of the things that, you know, many people ask, and I had a similar experience. I wanted to be on a board, but I wanted to be on a board when I felt that it was time to be on a board, that I had something to bring to the board. You know, and so can you talk to this group of ladies about, you know, how to do an assessment of when they're ready to join a board, and when they are, you know, what value proposition should they be bringing to a board?
Well, I'll take a crack at it, and then I'd like to ask you to share your thoughts too. And that's one of the things that's really terrific. It's always a dialogue when you meet people, and it's an opportunity to learn. So when are you ready? I think, first of all, you have to really understand, as I'm sure you do, because this is not a casual group of people. You're intentional, you're here, you're committed to learning and growing. You have to understand what it means to be on a board. Okay, it goes well beyond getting to put it on your LinkedIn page or, you know, the incremental access that you have. You have a real governance responsibility. You work for the shareholders of a company. And so when you start thinking about, you know, are you ready, you have to think about the capacity that you have to commit to really understanding and learning the underlying business of the board, of the company, of the board that you're on. Right? And that's really important because there's like, it's really exciting. There's an announcement sent out and you get all these, and then you're like, what? Stacks, books, volumes of material that you actually have to go through. You have to understand it. You're going to be put on a committee and you're sitting there. And I have to say, I don't know about you, Gail, but like those first few meetings, you want to talk about imposter syndrome. You know, you walk into some of these boards, these people know each other, you don't really know who's who, you don't know when to ask, but therefore do the work beforehand. You know, think about what you have as your priority right now, and what capacity do you have to commit to understanding the underlying businesses and to pursue these opportunities. The second piece of that time commitment is doing the due diligence on what boards you want to be on, because you get to decide, right? Like, let's not forget, we all get to decide ultimately who we want to engage with at the board level. And that's really important because you will spend, I don't know, how many meetings do your boards have? 5 or 6 a year at least?
5. They have 5 a
Plus,
year.
right? Plus
Plus
there's the committee meetings, plus the time that you have to really spend in understanding the material. So when you start thinking about, oh, I want to be on a board, do the homework. Understand whether you have the time to really commit. Make sure that the organizations that are approaching you are ones that you're really interested in. Think about the organizations and the companies and the industries that you'd like to be involved in, and get busy understanding the culture of those organizations. Because for me, if I really believe in the underlying business that they're in, and I'm aligned with their culture, then I will think about it. If those things are not yeses, no. How about you, Gal?
I mean, again, I think that your answer is absolutely perfect. I mean, at the end of the day, you're providing oversight for a board. You're not doing the day-to-day accountability, the work of it. And so in order to really add value to the board, the management team needs to feel you're not going to listen to somebody that's not bringing value to you. And so that's why it's so important for you to ensure that you're able to add value and know exactly what your value proposition is as you join a board. And because again, you don't want to just be on a board because someone needs to check a box and say they have an African American female on a board. You want to be on a board in which your voice is heard and you're respected. So that's why when we talk about it, because oftentimes, you know, it sounds sexy to say I'm on a board. I mean, it's the next big move in your career, but you only want to be someplace where you feel valued and where you feel that you're making a difference. Is what Edith and I, we were chatting about that backstage. You know, I'm interested first before I get to Amazon, because as you know, Edith is on Amazon, and I think everybody knows who Amazon is here, and PepsiCo. But you know, what I was interested in, Edith, is if you would tell this team what it's like, the accountability of a board member versus the accountability of management and how they differ.
Sure. So let's go back to what we were talking about before. As a board member of a public company, you work for the shareholders, right? That's your job. You are there and representing shareholder interests. Now, the terrific thing is, for great companies, the interests of the shareholders are aligned with the interests of the company. Because if you don't do the right things from a governance perspective, you're not going to be in a strong position to capture the market opportunities that exist for you and your business across the board. But when you're coming from a place of having operating responsibility, which I did, you did, most people who are on boards have an operating skill set that they're looking for. You go into there thinking, all right, where are the problems? I'm here to fix them. And actually, you're not there to fix the problems.
Right.
And so how to really create that balance between digging in and understanding and asking questions, but not getting so involved that you are behaving more like a operating business person versus a governance person takes some getting used to.
Yeah.
But it's important to know where that boundary is, and it's important also when you start thinking about conversations with CEOs, and maybe we should talk a little bit about that, like what is the path, like how does it actually work, who do you talk to, you know, who are you interviewed by. They look for that. You know, if you go in there and say, okay, here are the 5 things that I really want to understand and I think I can help operate the company better, they're like, oof. You know, I don't know. Is she going to know the boundaries and why does that matter?
Yeah. Again, I think that's and you're right, it's one of the questions that they all ask, you know, is do you really understand the difference between being a board member and being management? And when you're new to a board, you want to come in and you want to add value, but your value is not to do the work. Your value is to provide oversight, you know, ask questions, not, you know, just to ask questions to prove you have a question to ask, but to ask very thoughtful questions that help enable the success of the business. So you talked a little bit about what a board member does, and let's talk about the role and what the governance is like. Are you able to share a little bit about that for this group if they're thinking about joining a board, and you know, what are some of the watch items, the things they need to prepare for?
Sure. So many boards have a similar cadence to them, and That's whether you're on a private company board or a public company board. In a for-profit or non-profit is a little bit different, but there are similar cadences to it. You know, there's a tremendous amount of information flow that comes to you as a board member. And it is really important to know that you have to commit the time to get through it. And you might say, well, that's a no-brainer, but it's a different level of time, particularly as you're getting up to speed. It's like starting a new job without actually the immersive experience of starting a new job, right? Because when you start a new job, you have things you have to do, and you get sucked into all these different activities, and the next thing you know, everything that was foreign is familiar. When you're on a board, you meet every quarter or so. And so you've got to really read what's on the piece of paper, maybe supplement it with conversations, and start to put the pieces together. And it's quite a bit. The other thing is that you have different, and I'm just going to get really honest about what it's like. You know, I showed up on the Amazon board or the PepsiCo board, and there are people who have been on those boards for a very long time. We just celebrated on Amazon a woman who's been on the board for 25 years. Right? They're talking about when they were packing boxes at Christmas time. That's how long, some people have been involved. And so you kind of have to understand and be patient a little bit with the fact that there's flows in a board just like there are in everything. And you figure out who knows what, how to build relationships with the board members so that they can help you and give you feedback and give you instincts on, hey, this is something that's it's going to be really important. Maybe I can help you understand where that's coming from. And then you have to build respect and relationships with the leadership of the company, right? Because you don't want to be there as a passenger. First of all, you're spending a lot of time as a passenger. I mean, that's just painful. So you've got to really think about how you're going to get up to speed. For me, I ask a lot of questions. Not what you were saying earlier, sometimes you get edgy and you just go in there and just asking all these questions and you don't even really want the answers, but you want to sound smart. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is when you go through all of the information and you hear things over and over again and no one's really getting at the gist of it, I love asking those questions. And I love asking them and listening to the answers. And I think that's where we got to really give ourselves a little bit of a push forward, because I think sometimes we as women of color, we wait to make sure that it's brilliant, to make sure that it's going to be an earth-shattering, and then by the time you ask the question, it's no longer relevant or you don't ask it at all. Yeah. And so you kind of have to go into these things with a little bit of mojo and confidence, not crazy confidence, right? I wouldn't suggest trying to tell Jeff Bezos that he doesn't know what he's doing with respect to Mars, but even if you think that, that's probably not the move. But a confidence that allows you to really engage in a very meaningful way. That's very, very important.
Yeah. One of the things that you said earlier at the beginning, you talked about the power of relationships. Talk about relationships on the board and their importance, and relationships and the importance in actually getting on a board.
Well, look at this here, right? How many people are here? 1,200, 1,500?
Yeah.
A lot. A lot. And the thing that I'm really struck by is not only that you're here very intentionally focused on the conversations, but you walk through the vast hallways here, everybody is making the connection. Everybody's talking. And for different reasons, but that's relationship building. That's why this conference is so, so important. And you don't know where that connection's going to come from, right? I find sometimes, we've all done it, right? You look at who's going to be there, and I'm going to find that person, and that's good, that's preparation. But sometimes, don't you think, Gail, yeah, it's the casual conversation with someone who's in a space that you're curious about, that you intentionally want to learn about, that you engage in that, and the next thing, that relationship leads to another relationship, et cetera, et cetera. So commit the time to that. And that's actually something that I've learned over the years, because, friends that I've known for a long time, they describe me as an introverted extrovert, right? I only have, my excuse has always been, I got so much going on, I have my family, I have 3 friends, Roberta Graves, one of them who stuck with me for 40 years, even though I very rarely returned her phone calls for 20 years, I
She was calling me.
She was
I
calling
have one
you.
like that.
All right. You know, I'm like that person. But I'm putting all this out there because, you know, you got to make time for it. And you got to make time like this to really start to expand your network. And as I've had more capacity, as my children are now adults and, you know, I'm not, you know, driving a day-to-day business at the scale of Goldman Sachs. I have a small business. You know, I like plan it. Like I look at the thing and I'm like, I really want to know more about AI. Who here is speaking on, you know, something in the tech world? I really find that person, I like run up to them, I talk to them about their jobs, and so do that networking so that you can start to build those relationships. So when they're in their conversations being asked, as we're all being asked, God, I'm really looking to find that black woman to join my board. I just don't know anybody. I don't know anyone. I can't find. You're like, hey, I know someone.
Right.
You know, I've got to know this person, because you are in a position where people want to know you, and you should know people as well.
Yeah. I love, though, that you reminded the group, and it's something that I always talk about, that all relationships matter. You know, sometimes we focus on the people who are in the position at the moment, and we don't recognize that, you know, you might be in the room, maybe somebody who is 2 levels down in the organization who in 2 years might be the next CEO. So it's really important to cultivate all of those relationships, and because they really do come in handy, and they certainly help you. But let's also talk about now on the same thing on relationships as it relates to the board dynamics. I mean, because any highly functioning board wants strong, a collegial team. So how important that is. I mean, there are no lone rangers on the boards.
There are no lone rangers on the board.
Right.
It's really important to cultivate relationships on the board with your fellow board members, with the C-suite execs who are on the board, because often the chairman and the CEO of the organization are on the board, and the people who are supporting the board, like the general counsel. More often than not, the CHRO often presents, particularly if you're on one of the committees that deals with leadership or compensation. And so really understand how important all of these constituencies are, and when you have breaks and you realize that you have not actually had that conversation with a fellow board member, be intentional, have that conversation. Get to know them. Because at the core, you know, it's so interesting, these boards, because everyone's coming at it from a different angle, which makes it really interesting, right? Because you have all sorts of opportunities to learn. But what do you think, Gail? At times, it can also be a little bit off-putting, because you have to kind of work to find what that common ground is. Now, the good thing is you're on a board together, so there's always that topic. But use the moves that you have used in life in building relationships. Find the common ground, you know, start to communicate. And also, I have, in the boards that I've been on, often gone to people on the board who have been there a while and gotten feedback from them. Right? And I could say I've had the opportunity to chair comp committees and be on the audit committees, and so I've gone to the CFO and I've asked, can you give me some feedback on the questions that I asked? Did they make sense? Like what were we missing? And people are really eager to give you feedback, and that has really helped me figure out what moves make the most sense to make the biggest impact.
And that's really being confident in who you are. That at the end of the day, all you're trying to do is to make sure you can be your best self, and you can be your best self with information. So I think that's a really good call out. So, but again, we have in this group, we have people who are at different stages. Some of them are probably board ready, probably can sit on a board tomorrow, and some who are at that phase where they're like, that looks like something I want in my career path. Let's talk to them a little bit about what you would recommend to them to do. So what would be some of the things, the steps they can do, because we want you to put a plan in place to begin the journey towards a board seat.
So I would first think of everything that you're doing now, whether you're interested in joining a board next year or in 5 or 10 years, as part of your plan, right? Because people are going to be interested, and you are going to be interesting and relevant for a board position based upon a series of experiences. And so in many of the panels that I've sat in on today, there's a lot of conversations, appropriate conversations about people being intentional, about thinking about what they're focused on, and I would add to that the experiences that you would like to have, right, that you're interested in, but also those that you would need to have to be positioned for whatever the next is. In the context of this conversation, we're talking about boards. You know, it's critically important to understand where you want to commit from an industry and a sector perspective. I think sometimes we go into this thinking, whoever calls me, I'm going to be interested.
Right.
And I don't know whether that's, I think you should be interested when people call you, don't get me wrong. But I think when you have a plan, as Gail mentioned, you have a plan as to the type of companies and the type of industries that you'd want to be involved in, right? I had a plan. I had a plan that I wanted to be involved in companies that were very relevant from a talent perspective, right? Where their decisions influence the experience of lives of many, many people, not just the people that I've been surrounded with, so finance people, consult, but like many people who are working and living in this country and who are going to shape the country in the future. And an underlying business that made sense to me. And so when you start with a criteria, with cultures that matter.
Yes.
And so you can read that on a piece of paper, but if you look at all the things I've done over the course of the last decades, it kind of all feeds into that, right? It's part of my storyboard. So I think as you prepare and start thinking about boards, it's similar to other things. Start to put together your storyboard.
Right.
You know, and what do you want those chapters in that storyboard to be? And therefore, what do you need to do to get the experiences and exposures to make that happen? What do you think, Gail?
Yeah.
How did you pursue?
I absolutely agree. I think very similar. Edith and I spent much of our career, at least in the space of culture and talent. And so I think many of you know that, you know, until the past few years, I mean, it wasn't as respected. I mean, many boards wanted CEOs, former CFOs. And so when about 6 years ago, I made a decision that, you know, I felt that I had been at the C-suite a significant amount of time. I thought I had something to offer another organization, especially an organization that was committed to what was important to me, which was people, culture, and DE&I. So yes, what you said is so appropriate. And the main thing, though, and again, you all heard this from Janice and Sherilyn and from all of the honorees last night, is really knowing your own power and your own worth and what you can bring to an organization,
Absolutely.
which in turn help you make the right decision. I serve on 3 boards now, but I've turned down boards. Because I don't want to be any place that I'm not happy or that I don't feel that I can add value. And so we want you to get that confident. I know Edith and I, when we were chatting offline, we want you to believe in yourself like that you have something to offer and that you will only do that someplace that values what you value.
Right.
Is what I think. Talk to them about, you know, one of the things you talk about is putting the plan in place and then identifying what skills you need. Talk about the role of not-for-profit.
Such an important question and comment, actually. I think that's really important. First of all, aside from the role of being on a nonprofit board that could position you for a public board, being on a nonprofit board is really, really important. You know, I had an opportunity to meet with the woman who's now running Dress for Success, and she started out at KPMG as a partner. She went on to do other things, and now she's taking on this incredibly important organization. How meaningful is that, right? And so when you think about the experiences as part of your life portfolio, and I'm not just talking about your job, I'm talking about your family, your friends, philanthropic efforts, particularly as a board member, are really, really critically important. And so I actually misspoke. My first board was not SLAC, it was in the nonprofit space, right? I'm involved with Mount Sinai Health Systems in New York and the Museum of Modern Art and Howard. I was involved, like the list of academic institutions is very long. And honestly, that helped sustain me for a long period of time because I felt like I was learning, I was contributing, and I was getting the moves of being a board member in a very meaningful way and working with people who from other companies, et cetera. The other thing, so whether you want to be on a board of a public company or that's not your thing, nonprofit involvement is critical. Right. It's been critical to us as a people, and we all need to be doing it. The other thing that I think is important to keep an eye out for are private companies, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so many that are popping up, and some of them, like Medley, as a company that I've created with my daughter, we're tiny. We're like a real true startup. We have 10 people. You know, we don't even have a board yet. But there are many companies, but we'll have a board at some point. Most companies that are going from startup to seed to Series A, those are the different levels that are defined by your ability to finance, have boards. And that is awesome, I think.
I would agree.
Wouldn't you agree?
I agree with you. The other thing I wanted to add on that particular question, and I don't know if you agree with this as well, I remembered when I did a lot of not-for-profit boards early on, and I didn't join the audit committee or the finance committee because I didn't like it, but later on I understood how important that was to have that audit experience or that finance experience. So I would encourage you, if you're on not-for-profit boards, to think about joining some of the more financially oriented committees, because I think it will really help you as you pursue long-term going to a public board. I don't know your thoughts on that.
I think that's an excellent, excellent suggestion. And just generally, you know, we just have to understand that, you know, particularly in any organization, you gave a nonprofit example, dollars matter, and understanding that side of the business, the economics of the business, the spreadsheets, the finances, all of that, really, really important. And I've seen it in my role on all the boards I've served on. My last 10 years at Goldman Sachs, I ran the HR function with all of my many colleagues. But before that, I was running a bunch of different businesses in the sales and trading side of the business. And I got to tell you, that has been invaluable to me. It's been invaluable to me not only in the role of running the HR function, but on these boards, because that's what you talk about.
Yeah.
Right? You talk about how you're going to raise money. You talk about how you're going to deploy capital, return on capital. And so opportunities to really get at that, I think are really important, and the example that you highlighted is a great one.
Yeah, it's one now. Like, I just joined another board, and I basically, they asked if there was a particular board that I want, not board, but a committee that I wanted to be on. They were initially putting me on the Human Capital Committee, and that was fine, but you serve on two. And I said that I wanted to be on the Audit Committee. Not that I wanted to read all of that material, but because the Audit Committee tells you so much about the organization. So again, on your not-for-profit boards, please look at the Audit Committee and the Finance Committee. There's so much to be learned. I have one more question for our friend here, Edith, but and before I turn it over to you. So I want you all to think about what's on your mind about joining a board while Edith responds to this question. And so Edith, tell us about, you know, you serve on Amazon, you serve on PepsiCo, two very different organizations. What was the biggest, learning for you with those two?
Scale, massive scale, in ways that I didn't expect. You know, so. And you pay attention to it differently, right? So, you know, PepsiCo, right? You see the bottles. Do you see the trucks, right? All over the country. In Mexico, I saw a PepsiCo truck, right? They are, I think, if not the biggest consumers of potatoes in the country, right? They have really understood their responsibility to think about the products that they're selling and the salt content and the sugar content. By the way, I asked all of those questions before I joined the board because I thought that was really important for me to know. But the scale and scope and the complexity of the business, both Pepsi and Amazon, is you know it, you see it, you feel it in the way that you access their businesses. But when you're sitting in that boardroom, it is really quite extraordinary. And then, of course, Amazon, you know, their businesses as individual businesses would probably be in the top 50 companies in the world. And think about the complexity of the differences in some ways of their business, right? They started out as a marketplace, selling books. AWS, massive business. The marketplace businesses, massive businesses. The business that Alicia Bowler-Davis runs, she's responsible as an SVP for all of the fulfillment centers, et cetera. Massive business. And so Amazon Studios, massive. People. We have Candy Castleberry here. How about doing diversity, inclusion, et cetera, for 1.9 million people? Think about that. With jobs all over the world, all different. So that was one of the things that you can read on paper, but then when you're looking at it and you're in it, it put me back a bit. But not for long, because I still have to read all the materials, right? So you gotta you have to understand that it's gonna take time, but you just have to jump in there.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I mean, certainly the boards I'm on are nowhere near the scale of those two, and I know how much time I put in preparing to try and understand what I'm supposed to be doing and how I can add value. I want to see if there's anyone with a question before I ask another question. All right, women of power, any questions about being on a board? Do I see anyone who's going to jump up? Remember, oh, I see you. Wonderful. Right in the back. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Yvette Wynn, and I serve on a few nonprofit boards. And I was listening to you earlier talk about, and thank you for this great conversation, the being on a board of a company you really believe in. But there's also the chief executive, and sometimes you feel that they're effective and sometimes less so. And do you have any guidance, maybe on a nonprofit board, when you become concerned about that chief executive's ability to continue, or whether they're engaged or not, and how you think about that as a board member?
Well, you know, as part of the key roles of being on the board is governance, and that's the CEO, right? So the CEO works in most contexts in public company boards for the board. And in all of the boards that I've been involved in, on nonprofit and public, there is what's called an executive session, right? So everyone who works at the company, whether that's in support of the board or as CEO, et cetera, leave, and the chair of the board uses that forum as an opportunity to discuss things, because that chairperson's role is to go back and to think about how to give the CEO feedback. And so that's a very, very critical aspect of the functioning of a board. And it also really gives a lot of weight and significance to the chair of the board, right? Because it's their job to really make sure that he or she is representing the views of the collective board. And I would say, is manage an okay word to say? Is to make sure that they're not surprises.
Yes.
Right? Because in a public construct, it could go terribly poorly if the board is not aligned with the CEO. And so I think it's important, if you're in one of these situations, to use your voice.
Absolutely.
And use the channels that exist that have been set up to voice your opinions, to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is to provide insight and governance.
Absolutely. The only thing I want to add on that one is, though, that you have to remember that your reputation is always on the line. And so if you're in an organization and you're seeing something that you know is not appropriate, you certainly should avail yourself, as Edith has said, of every, forum they have for it to be addressed. But at the end of the day, if it isn't, then you need to make sure that you're not there. At some point, you make some decisions about what you should do. At least that's what I've always believed about the companies that I've worked with and for, that I have to feel proud of what they're doing and how they're representing.
Gail, that's such an important point.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Sarbanes-Oxley is what Janice was just referencing.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think you're highlighting the importance of the fact that you're tying your reputation to an organization.
Totally.
Right? You tie your reputation to an organization when you work for an organization.
Right.
Right? And I think what we're seeing now is increased shift to people saying, you don't align with my values, I'm not working here anymore. Yeah. And when you're on the board, or you're looking at a board opportunity, make sure that you think through what the potential reputational issues a company might have. And so, yes, it might be wonderful to join a company that employs 1.5 million people until those 1.5 million people are very angry.
Right.
Right? and do you have confidence that the leadership of the organization and the culture of an organization can react in a way that you would be supportive, and that you would be okay or proud of being aligned with. So reputational issues are real ones that need to be considered.
It is. And the other thing, too, that happens that I have discovered, even in certain organizations, is that sometimes the fact that they know that someone will ask a tough question will control some behaviors that shouldn't occur.
Great point.
You know, so use your voice in a positive way to say, hey, that doesn't, you know, you can, you know, one of the things I used to do all the time is like, I'm not sure about that. Can you explain? And so what you're saying is that you're not going to just get away with that. And so I would encourage you to think about it through that avenue. Any other questions? I see one over here. Yes.
Hi. My question is this. You mentioned not looking at boards that are just looking to add a black woman on the board. Are there any other red flags or things that we should look out for in either the research that we're doing or within ourselves to make sure that we're not just adding being a checkbox?
Yeah, I would say something slightly different, Lee, and I think maybe it wasn't clear enough earlier. I'm happy to talk to a board that wants to add me as a black woman. I think that is not only okay, entirely appropriate. I think that it is taken too long to get that real and to realize that if you don't have a black woman, a person, a black man, a person of color, how are you in the world going to be able to run your company in a way that's going to be relevant to humanity going forward? Where it breaks down for me is, and I've asked in all the conversations I've had, so, you know, how do you think about me as a, you know, as a black woman? And if someone says to me, oh, that's not a factor, please, come on. Like, of course it's a factor. It's just like a factor when they're trying to find a former CEO who ran a robotics company, right? Why is that person there? Because she ran a robotics company. And so I think what makes a difference to me, to your question, is what's behind that? What's the and, right? You want to have a black woman on the board. Why does that matter to you? Right? So it's the whys of the conversation that I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone who's willing to answer real questions with real answers and challenge me on my point of view. Absolutely. And if you're in that first conversation, to your question, like what other things, like really use your conversations with potential, with whether it's the CEO or other board members or the search firm that you're looking for. If you're walking out of those conversations saying, I'm not really sure, you gotta really dig further because it might not be the right thing.
Yeah. And that's what we were saying. I mean, it's a great follow-up question. I mean, certainly we want them to be intentional about adding to their board the skills, the diversity, et cetera, they need. But are they committed? You know, or is it just you're going to be on that board and you're going to be miserable on that board because they're not totally committed to the things that you're committed to and actually changing the organization by allowing your voice to be heard? You know, so that's the key. It's those follow-up questions about why, you know, what is your commitment in that space? But it's a great follow-up.
Thank you.
And I see one over this way. Yes, great question. See, Edith, we knew they would come out with these questions.
Step up, no doubt. This is not a casual group of women here. No.
Hi, I'm Jenny, and I want to thank you so much for speaking today, and I have just 2 questions. One is, you mentioned that you only join the boards of organizations that are aligned with you and your values, and so I wondered if you could take a moment to tell us what your values are and sort of what the most effective and artful ways there are to kind of investigate what the true culture is of a company and not just what it purports to be on the website. And my second question is, we've spent most of today talking about you as a board member. I'm kind of curious about you as a private investor. So what companies as a shareholder are you interested in investing in these days?
You want to start or should I take it?
Go ahead.
So, you know, that values question for me, like, is not a hard one for me, right? I want to work with organizations and with people who understand the responsibility that they as individuals and organizations have to making an impact on as many people as possible across multiple dimensions, right? And so, how are you hiring people? How are you creating an experience where everyone can perform to their potential? What are you providing them in terms of wellness, benefits, et cetera? And how are you thinking about your organizational construct generally so that everybody has that access to opportunities? Now, that is like a very, very high bar that I have worked on myself as a leader for many decades. And so it's not necessarily the case that I expect every one of those things to be exactly where it is, should be. But I have to have a sense that there is the potential and the receptivity to organizations to pay attention to those things for their employees and their customers and the communities where they operate. And that's the beautiful thing about what was the underpinning for me growing up in Business for Black Enterprise, right? Because they all, the articles, the writing, always weave those things together, right? It was about being on the top list, and we all wanted to be on it, and we were excited when we got there. But it would never stop there. It's about all of the dimensions of what companies were doing and what individuals or companies. So I look for that potential. And I also look for a potential to help an organization evolve, especially now when status quo lasts about a week. And so you can really get into a company if people's ears are open and they're listening, and not maybe overnight, to really make an impact. So that's the way I think about it. I'm not perfect, organizations aren't perfect, but boy, should people strive to do better. And in terms of your second question, I think, as an investor, I'm intrigued by a number of different sort of paths to building value. Certainly, having spent more time in the last years in the tech world and seeing what it's like to be in that sort of tech-enabled world as I am in Medley, I realize how important it is to really think about technology and AI and trends, because I do think that is forever going to continue to impact the way that businesses are run and that businesses are relevant. So I look for organizations and products that I think have a strong fit to customers, right? Are people going to pay you for it? And strong leaders who actually can deliver into that opportunity. And that's where I think we're in a hugely advantaged position, because as we all know, there's huge underinvestment in businesses started and grown by people of color. So I think there's a huge opportunity there. I'd also say that I'm spending a lot more time now thinking about small businesses in the traditional way that we should be thinking about small businesses. I mean, another show of hands, how many people here are products of people who have run small businesses, right? Parents, physicians, educators, those are small business people. Our communities had to thrive with small businesses because we had to provide for each other because we didn't have access to all these different things. And so I'm really intrigued with the old-fashioned small business that actually generates revenues and makes profits and is a very strong business. It might not be a $5 billion business in 5 years, but nevertheless is critical for economic growth in the communities that we live in. So those are the things that are on my radar screen.
I would have to just say, echo it. I mean, certainly everything with me is about the culture. Is it an organization that cares about its people? Is it cares about the communities in which it operates in? And it cares about its customers. And when I'm looking to invest, I'm looking at whether or not it has a sound management team, and does it have a compelling strategy that will allow it to, be profitable and grow. So those are some of the things I look at, but a really good question. And the thing about culture, when something doesn't fit. At the end of the day, there are people that can work in cutthroat cultures. There are some. I can't. And you have to always follow your own gut about how you feel about that. And you asked about how to do your research. I mean, this is where networking comes in handy, to find out who has worked at the company, who can tell you a little bit about it. Are there people there who may be new into the company that you can find out you know, what they were like at their prior companies. Will they be a change agent? Will you be able to come in and be a part of changing our culture? So again, it's just doing all your research. In everything, it's doing your research. This is your life. You're going to spend it every day. Make sure that you've done the research to make the right decisions for yourself. So thank you so much. And I see there's a question over here.
Hello, and thank you so much for both of you being here. So I kind of have a question. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Would you say that an entryway into being a board is being, as a parent, being on like a school leadership team or a part of a PTA board or being a part of like a community board? Because that's something, when you talk about culture, something you're invested in. You're already invested in like your children's growth, their educational growth, your community growth. So would you say that's a good way to get started before the nonprofit?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Think about the way that you just described. I'm sorry, what was your name?
Oh, artists.
Artist, think about the way that you've described your activity there.
Yeah.
That's part of the storyboard,
Right.
right? Thinking about what's required for your kids' education, figuring out how to make sure that everybody's on. That's exactly the kind of translation that I'm talking about. And sometimes when you're in it and you're in the middle of it, connecting those dots is really hard. And particularly when you go from prioritizing, you know, your presence in your existing role and going up that organization, et cetera, sometimes it's really hard to sort of say, but is any of this stuff relevant? You know, I spent all of this time trying to get to X, and now I'm wondering, like, what is X anyway? And I don't really want to do it. And so, you know, just thinking through how you can talk about the things that you're doing, one, makes it really exciting, the things that you're doing, and it helps you translate to what is going to happen going forward.
Yeah. Great question. Thank you. And I saw someone over on that side of the room. Yes, question.
Yes, so my name is Sabrina Gertrude, and a few years ago I started a real estate entrepreneurship business, and a part of that I would do presentations for private lending. One of our investors decided to invest in us and later asked me to interview to be a part of their board. Now, I must say initially I did not know the magnitude of what will come with being a new board member, but nonetheless they selected me, and as I'm going through this process, I'm growing and I'm learning. However, if you can think about when you first started on a board, what would you have done differently to drive the change? Like, I ask a lot of questions, but sometimes you wonder, like, okay, what really is my role?
You know, what would I do differently? I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff in my life I would do differently. We don't have time for that. What would I do differently on boards? I wouldn't join 2 Fortune 50 companies in the same week. That was not a good move. I would have, I didn't, just simply because it's a lot. And so translating that to something that is probably a little bit more broadly interesting, I would say just give yourself a little bit of runway and not try to take it all in, you know, in the first, 3 to 4 meetings, because it's not really possible. And, if and don't beat yourself up if you don't ask a brilliant question that everyone says, oh, that's a really great question, or, because, when people have you join their boards, they're not actually expecting you to kill it on the first meeting. Right? They understand it's a long-term commitment. And so that would probably be the advice I would give. I'm not a patient person in any way, shape, or form. But I have learned to be more patient and to give myself the opportunity to learn, right? To learn, to take it in, to grow, and to impact. It's very hard to impact before you learn, before you grow.
It's okay to take some time, is what I think Edith is saying. So, ladies, we are preparing to wrap up. And what I know that when Edith and I talked about this last week is that we really hope that you will leave this session, really thinking about where you are on your journey and that you'll begin to plan it. and then that you'll take the steps that you can be successful. I think Edith has shared, certainly she's had an amazing career, and she shared some really great insights for you. I hope that you will take those, and that you will, in a few years or next year or next month, that you will be at your destination. If you would you please help me thank Edith Cooper for being an outstanding interviewer. Great job, Edith. Great job. Great job. She dropped the mic. Give her another round of applause.
That's hilarious.
All right.
All right, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edith and Gail, for such an informative interview and conversation. Let's give them another round of applause. Okay. Well, ladies, I hope you were taking notes and gained a deed of insight. We'll look for you to be at the next corporate board. We'll look for you to actually be the next corporate board appointee. Thank you, Prudential, for a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your sessions, and I will see you guys outside. Take care.
What would you call a joy that knows no bounds? That is as solemn as it is sweet, with an outpouring of soul that connects us. Joy in resilience, joy in creativity, joy in happiness, joy in strength. What would you call a joy that knows no bounds? A joy supreme. AARP celebrates Black joy. Visit us at aarp.org/Black community.